You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
I want to introduce a tradition here for this podcast and all future podcasts, wherein I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present. Knowing the stories of the Aboriginal people will always be written in this landscape. Okay, here's something different for this week's podcast. I want all of you who are tuning in to take a look at joining my Facebook page, Good Men Great, and leaving your impressions about what has made some difference to you on the comments in that Facebook page, Good Men Great. Because, as I'm going to explain at the end of this particular podcast, we're running a raffle. So, really simple. Go to my Facebook page, Good Men Great, and mention what impacted you the most from the podcast. I'd love to hear it. And for your benefit, there is a prize. Until next time. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change, my podcast on all things masculinity, gender, equity, morality, and psychological well-being, especially if you're looking to thrive in a society and culture that makes that rather difficult. So, this week's episode, what do I want to talk about? Well, something really exciting is happening, and that is on Friday, August 26, 2022, my book, Making Good Men Great, Surfing the New Wave of Masculinity, is being launched as an ebook. I'm really excited about this because it makes my book more available to more people and hopefully will inspire people to consider making some important changes. So essentially, let me give you a quick rundown on the book. So the book is not a thick book. It's not an academic tome, but rather what I wanted to produce with this book was a book that's accessible to most people about some very, very important issues. And firstly, and this is the first part of the book, it's about deconstructing patriarchy and why we need to do that. So I've spoken about this time and time again. It's a persistent theme in my podcast, but it's persistent because we're not getting very far. And so I want to inspire more people, more men to step into this space to examine what they believe masculinity is about and what it should be about. Because the traditional view of masculinity, which is actually patriarchy, is toxic. Not just for women and children and societies and communities and families, but for us men, it's a toxic drink that we've been given to swallow without thinking about it. And I want all of us men to think about it, because once we start thinking about it, we're going to do a couple of really important things. And one is that we are going to align with women on a very important project, and that is gender equality. Because we're seeing some stuff in our society at the moment that is actually challenging equality in an interesting way, and that is that in certain areas and certain institutions, it appears that some men, and I think particularly, the family law court in Australia especially, that some men are not getting a fair deal in many respects. Now, the problem is that there's been a lot of men who've spoilt the game for us. And so those of us who are trying to do the right thing and who are committed to equality and good ethics and morality are getting drowned out. And I speak especially about the men's rights movement that has taken a particularly antagonistic view of gender relationships. And I think we need to help, the brothers out there understand that what they're doing is simply perpetuating a poisonous, cancerous ideology that we've been subjected to for oh so long, and it needs to stop for oh so many different reasons. So, when I published the book in the first instance, I got some really good reviews, and BuzzFeed observed that the book is truly about masculinity that inspires change, and that it provides a platform for tips and meaningful conversation. And that's one of the things that I want to really encourage, is that we need to establish a meaningful, deeply meaningful conversations about this thing called gender. And so it needs to happen. But the other thing that I wanted to do in the book is to take how patriarchy, how traditional masculinity has adversely affected us as men, to look at what it is that we need and can do as individuals to overcome the problem. And so, what is it that I mean by new masculinity? And so, one of the strong parts that I'm seeing emerge amongst lots of men is the capacity to organise themselves around the idea of becoming strong social networks and bonds. Now, all of that requires, in fact, similar values. And this is where I want us to be clear about the values that we're going to subscribe to, that is going to help ourselves individually, our families, our relationships, our community, our society, and ultimately the planet. And I'm quite serious when I talk about, think globally but act locally. Now, that doesn't mean I'm a big subscriber for globalism. I'm not talking in economic terms. I'm talking about terms wherein we share, despite our differences, because we can respect differences, similar values. And that can be across religious groups, it can be across ethnic groups, and certainly it is across gender. Most people will agree that, men and women should be equal. But we still got this residual tug to go back. Well, we're not. Well, it depends what we're talking about. So when I come back to part 2 in the book, one of the things that I'm trying to encourage men to do is to raise their self-awareness. Okay, I am absolutely, in my clinical work, inundated by things like anxiety, depression, suicidality, the disturbance of, of the psyche, but also the soul. The question of what's my purpose and what meaning does life have. All these things are persistent themes in my work. Now, it's interesting because technologically we have come along in leaps and bounds, and, we live longer than what we did 50 to 100 years ago. But what is it that we're doing with that extended lifespan? Are we, in fact, healthier as well? It's all very well living to 100, but if you're brain dead and in a hospital bed, that's not much chop. We need to think about what it is that we do that makes us healthier, not just in body, but in mind as well. And let me throw in this nebulous concept about soul. I mean, I don't care how you define that, but it is, in my book, the spirituality that we need to, reconnect with. It doesn't need to be a religion. In fact, possibly the more spiritual we become, the more less dependent on religion we might become, which would be good because there's some real serious problems in extreme religiosity, and there's lots of research on that. So aside from, self-awareness, what else am I talking about? What else do I want us as men to really focus on? Well, the next bit is flexibility, because the landscape's changing. One of the reasons why a lot of us as men are in dire straits is because we're rigidly hanging on to a toxic ideology. We're refusing to embrace change in a healthy way. Now, that doesn't mean every change is useful, positive, or in fact beneficial. That requires critical thinking, and that is something that in my book has become rather rare. And so I really, in a way, want to foster that. I want to sort of light the embers of being able to sit down and take ideas apart and have good, meaningful conversations about it, where we understand each other's differences better without it needing to be a competition, but rather something that we can see as enhancing our relationships. Okay, so that's a very important idea. So once we begin to become more flexible, we therefore become more adaptive. And that gives us resilience. But the other thing that's really, really important is how do I create good, healthy relationships with those that I love and my kids, my friends, my community. And part of that is that if you're expecting your capacity to feel safe, secure, and satisfied to come from external sources, you're going to be waiting a long time. It's not going to happen, right? Because your own insecurities, your own lack of appropriate, healthy attachment to yourself is going to be projected into the world, and you are going to see others in a negative light and not in a positive one or in a constructive one. So projection is an interesting process, so we don't want to roll and slip into that. So again, when I work with men, a large part of my work is about how to help them identify their attachment styles. And the reason why that's really, really important is, as I said, is that if we haven't got a healthy attachment with ourselves, we're not going to be able to create that with somebody else. We're either going to be anxious, we're going to be avoidant, we're going to be possibly ambivalent, a whole bunch of stuff that just gets in the way of having a healthy relationship. It also means that we're not going to choose partners all that effectively. Now, there's a bombshell, isn't it? Often when I watch people who come into couples therapy about, the problems that they experience in their relationship with their partner, a lot of it has more to do with themselves than it does with the other person. And if it's a two-way street, i.e. both of you are in a state of conflict or avoidance or anxiety, how is the other person who doesn't experience those things going to be able to, pick up and hold the relationship together? They're not going to be able to do that. So I really want to come back down to this process of self-exploration. And part of the way of getting there is self-care, the sort of physical, psychological, and emotional, behavioral bits that we pick up that nurture us. Because remember, mum and dad mightn't have been all that nurturing, and if they're no longer here, there's not much we can do about it. And frankly, as an adult, I need to do that myself now. If I was a child, different story, but as an adult, the buck stops with me. So I think that's a really important process. Now, there's lots of steps in the book that highlights how we can do that. Things about mindfulness, all sorts of stuff that, most of us who work in psychology and counseling, try to help our clients with. The challenge I have had for a long time with lots of men, especially if I go back 30 years, is that we were sort of reluctant customers usually, and we would do absolutely the minimum to, get things going again, get them back on the straight and narrow. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we need to deep dive into the pain, into the pit, and really, get down and dirty and take a look at what we're really about and how I can heal in that place. the environment, the cosmos isn't going to do it for you. The cosmos is chaotic, random. There are some patterns that when we get self-aware enough, we can see and understand. But, someone once said to me, I've come to the conclusion that the universe sort of doesn't really give a shit about me. Now, that's a pretty harsh way of looking at it, and religion compensates for that insight by going, yes, but there's God, and God loves you and takes care of you. I'm not here to judge that, but I'm big on accountability. And my view is if I don't need to bother a higher power and that I can do it for myself, I should be doing that. It's a bit like teaching children, the only way you're going to learn how to tie your shoelaces is by doing it. Yes, you're going to stuff it up a few times, but with enough practice, you're going to get there and you're going to have a sense of achievement. But if you keep getting me or trying to get me to do it for you, that's not going to really work. It doesn't work for me because I don't want to do it. That's not because I'm unloving, but because I'm actually holding my child back in their development. And so I'll be there with a child to help them work through the mistakes that they make, but they're their mistakes, and it will be their success when they get and work through it about how it is that you tie your shoelaces. Okay, so a lot of this stuff is really, in a sense, pitching into the landscape of, you've got a choice. You've got a choice to survive, or you've got a choice to thrive. And here's the challenge. This is the gauntlet. Which bit are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to just meddle along and try to survive as best as you can? And there are some constraints around that. I'm not unrealistic here. If you live in an environment of inequity, of inequality, of immorality, thriving is tough. And sometimes even to the point where it's impossible to really, get the full bang for your buck psychologically and physically. But that doesn't mean we can't try. If I fall, 6 times, I'm going to get up 7. And I really believe that. I think we can't allow ourselves to hold back in wanting to learn and to be more aware. And sometimes that's painful because sometimes I'm going to need to go, you know what, I really screw this up. And that sort of self-evaluation is not negative thinking, and it's not being judgmental, it's being realistic. And we need to at times be realistic. And realistic means that I'm going to look at myself, warts and all, and I'm going to choose to do it differently, and hopefully I will evolve from that. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do as my treasured audience is I want you to go to my Facebook page, Good Men Great, and I want you to make a comment because it's going to be a raffle, and we are going to take a really close look at the comments that we get, and we're going to talk to people, hopefully, about those. But at the very bottom of it is that we're going to pick a raffle, and there'll be some giveaway prizes. And I really want you to tune in and engage with this because, as I said in very, very beginning of these podcasts, this is about making good men great. And if we as men become better, our relationships become better, our community becomes better, and ultimately, hopefully, at some point in the future, might be very distant, but we're going to have a better planet, a better humanity. So, remember, go to the Facebook page, Good Men Great, and talk about, comment on what's impacted you in these podcasts. And then, with a bit of a roll of the dice, you may get a lovely prize. Until next time, this is me signing off, and I hope you'll join us for the next podcast.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit makinggoodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.